My name is Clara Thompson, and I am 30 years old, living in a small, picturesque town called Lakeside City. It's a delightful place surrounded by water and trees, where people say hello to each other on the streets, and the sunsets paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. I always envisioned my life unfolding peacefully here, but the threads of my story took an unexpected turn that shook my world to its very core. I am a woman like many others. I have a career that I enjoy, a small circle of friends, and a family that I am close to. I lead my life with an innocence that perhaps made me a target for deceit. I have always believed in love and thought that I could build a future with someone who truly valued and respected me. So, when I met Dan in March of 2021, I was swept off my feet and thought that I had stumbled upon the man of my dreams. He was 43 years old and had cultivated an image that was nothing short of alluring. He seemed to have it all: his own flat, a decent car, the latest Apple gadgets, and a compelling story of having studied in Egypt for 2 years, which he claimed transformed him. In those first few weeks, everything felt like a whirlwind romance. Dan had a way of making life feel beautiful, and I was enchanted by his spiritual journey as a convert to Islam. His approach to life resonated with me on so many levels. It felt as if I had discovered someone solid, someone who could elevate my mundane existence into something transcendent. I believed he was grounded, independent, and mature. His charm and confidence wrapped me up like a warm blanket on a winter evening. Within a short time, we got married Islamically. I thought that I had taken a significant step toward building a future together. However, it wasn't long before everything began to unravel. As weeks turned into months, I found myself increasingly footing the bill for our lives together. I was the one paying for our meals, outings, and even the little luxuries that made our time together special. I learned that going to his flat was out of the question, as he had a male lodger who he claimed was necessary for his finances, as that was the only way he could help his parents, who lived in Scotland. I felt a sinking sense of dissatisfaction growing within me, but I kept trying to make things work. I excused his behavior, convinced that he would eventually pull his weight. He painted a picture of himself as a hardworking man whose remote employer was financially struggling, and assured me that he would eventually pay me back. The excuses kept coming. Sometimes he would contribute a little, 20 to 50 pounds here and there, to maintain the illusion of fairness. I wanted to believe him, as desperate as that felt. Yet things turned bleak when I learned about his car needing repairs. I foolishly gave him £400, thinking I was being a supportive wife. Little did I know, my financial contributions were making me more of a target than a partner. As if that was not enough, we went on a holiday to my homeland of the Seychelles in December of 2021, a trip that I paid for entirely. I wished to escape my reality, to enjoy life, to see it through the lens of luxury, all while dreaming of a future when we could spend more time there. But upon our return to the UK, my world collapsed. Just 2 days after we landed, Dan dropped the most astonishing and heartbreaking bombshell. He had 2 other wives. They were not legally married, but claimed to share his life, one in Scotland and the other in Egypt. I was stunned and felt nauseated by the betrayal. How could someone lie so effortlessly and deeply? My heart ached with confusion, and my mind swirled with anger. How could he do this to me? In the days that followed, I found myself battling emotions that I had never felt before. 10 days later, I unexpectedly received a message from Nadia, one of Dan's other wives. She was 50 years old and reached out to warn me. She revealed that Dan was a serial cheater who hid behind his religious beliefs, a man who put on a polished act to manipulate women into supporting his lifestyle. At first, I wanted to dismiss her claims, thinking she must be lying, trying to ruin my happiness. But a small voice within me knew she was telling the truth. The glamorous life he had portrayed when we met was nothing of his own accord. That flat he lived in, the car he drove, and the technology he flaunted, it all belonged to her. Nadia had been financially supporting him all along, covering the rent for his flats in both London and Scotland, and even providing him with a credit card. Suddenly, the pieces began to fall into place, and I saw him for who he really was, a man living off others while portraying himself as self-sufficient. I kept trying to pacify myself with thoughts of starting over, but it became harder with every passing day. I struggled to make peace with the reality of our situation while I paid over £1,000 monthly in rent and bills alone. My dreams of a future with him faded into nightmares. My breaking point approached swiftly, and soon it became clear that I needed to make some difficult decisions to regain control of my life. I reached a point where I could not bear the weight of the humiliation and deception. I emotionally detached myself from Dan. I began to analyze him closely, realizing he was only interested in triangulating women to support his so-called soft life. I decided to turn the tables and set a trap. I informed him of my desire to move back to Seychelles and build a new life. I spun tales about what that would look like, teasing glimpses of prosperity and dreams fulfilled. As I talked about the comfortable life I would create for myself back home, I was calm and collected. I visually painted a perfect picture of my future and made it abundantly clear that he would need to spend half the year with his other wife, which was Islamically appropriate. I stopped reacting to his manipulation and demands. I created emotional distance, and for the first time, I realized I had started to regain control. He began to chase me desperately, as if I had become a prize he could not afford to lose. There was a strange shift in our dynamic that left him increasingly agitated. Nadia, on the other hand, became frantic. She threatened to harm herself if he chose to leave her, and in turn, Dan began pushing her away more aggressively. She would send him increasing amounts of money to lure him back, while he would speak about her in the most derogatory terms. I suspected he said similar things about me behind my back. Then came the day when Nadia barged into his flat, shattering my already fragile sense of security. She had a breakdown, caught in the whirlwind of betrayal and pain. Amid her chaotic emotions, she pointed a finger at me, calling me a whore to his mother over the phone. But then, with an odd tenderness, she held my hand and offered help. I could see the devastation etched on her face, a reflection of 7 years of misplaced hope and yearning. In that moment, I finally understood the cost of Dan's manipulation, not just to me, but to her as well. Nadia gathered her belongings and walked out, taking with her a few of the things he had convinced her were his. Sometimes I felt she had every right to, considering he had pulled the wool over both our eyes for way too long. I remained in his flat, emboldened by the shift of power that I had grasped. I was resolute. I would not be paying rent or his bills anymore. This was his flat, and thus, his responsibility. Dan's expression morphed into shocked panic the day I told him these terms. The fear in his eyes was palpable. He had lost his prized cash cow in Nadia and suddenly realized my worth. He had underestimated my resolve to stand my ground. For all the deceit surrounding me, clarity slowly began to seep into my consciousness. Dan made desperate attempts to rectify his image in my eyes, hoping I would eventually soften and allow him to jerk me around again. But not anymore. I remained positive and calm, refusing to be dragged back into the cycle of his manipulation. I saw how he attempted to play the victim, but I stayed quiet. I no longer gave him the reaction he craved. Having shifted the balance of power worked wonders in my favor. Dan seemed to falter under his mounting responsibilities as the weight of his previous deceit crushed him. And then, when he was at his absolute lowest, I slipped away quietly. In many ways, I feel I orchestrated my own release from the web of his lies. I learned a great deal about myself through the heartbreak and suffering I experienced. If I could talk to my past self, or anyone else who has found themselves in similar situations, I would emphasize the importance of self-worth. People-pleasing can disguise itself as love and compromise, yet it often leads to self-abandonment. I thought I was being supportive when in reality, I was terrified that I would not be chosen or that I would not be loved. The truth became clear: financial abuse does not always announce itself loudly. It can be subtle and manipulative. And I now recognize that trusting the wrong person is never the fault of the one who was deceived. As painful as the experience was, I discovered a new kind of power, one that came from setting boundaries and maintaining emotional control. The moment I stopped reacting, the dynamic shifted completely. I began to reclaim my life and cultivate a state of independence that I had not known before. I would be kind to myself, stop blaming myself for the past, and most importantly, I would begin living for me. Revenge does not always come in the form of rage. Sometimes, it is simply healing and thriving in full view of those who tried to break you. Dan is left to grapple with the emptiness of his life, while I am forging ahead, paving my own path. There is a beauty in rebuilding oneself. Even just witnessing my own growth is enough to spark light in the dark corners of my heart. As for Nadia, I cannot help but think of her often. I genuinely hope she found her way back to wholeness and is healing from the scars of her own journey. Life has unfolded into a tapestry of lessons, making me wiser and stronger than ever. I have learned that what is most important is to find the courage to love oneself fiercely, unapologetically, and without fear. We rise from the ashes of deception and manipulation, and we flourish.